What's up, YouTube? And welcome to the next episode of my PS1 Publisher Spotlight series. This is a series where I look at complete sets by various publishers on the original Sony PlayStation. And we're going to talk about one of my favorite publishers for the system, which is Atlus, a publisher and developer that has been around since really the 8-bit era at the earliest that I'm aware, possibly even further beyond that point. They did have quite a varied library that they brought to the US for PS1. They also released several exclusives in Japan as well as Europe. Some of these games are games that Atlus developed themselves, but many of the games are actually developed by other Japanese developers, and they just provided publishing resources to release them in the United States. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at this complete set. This actually took me quite a while to put together. Several of these games are actually some of the more expensive titles on the PS1, as well as just really being kind of difficult to find in the wild or over time. So some of these I've had for many, many years. Some of these are recent acquisitions that got me to the point of having this set. So we'll go ahead and go through these alphabetically and take a look at some of the games that Atlus put out for the PS1, as well as some of the things that they did with their packaging to make their releases kind of stand out as somewhat unique. So we'll go ahead and start off with a series that I've always liked, and that is Bomberman. And they did their part by bringing some of the Bomberman titles to the PS1. They actually weren't the only developer or publisher to release Bomberman titles in the US, which is kind of unusual. They were split amongst a couple different publishers in the United States. But they did release two Bomberman releases. The first one of these is pretty unique. This is Bomberman Fantasy Race. And believe it or not, it is actually a kart racer style game, but with no karts. So if you played some of the prior Bomberman releases, you do have games where you ride these dinos or rabbit type characters. And ultimately, that's the goal of this game, is to participate in a kart racing style action game, but using the characters that you ride on for the races. I was really excited when this game came out. I thought this was going to be like a day one purchase for me, honestly. And I had a chance to rent the game before I bought it, and ultimately I really wasn't that impressed. So it took me several years to actually get this game. I think just really the big issue with it is that just the racing isn't extremely fast, which you would kind of hope for with a frantic series like the Bomberman titles are known for. I think the other thing going against it is just it was a 3D title, and some of the best Bomberman games to me are some of the earlier 2D releases, especially games like Saturn Bomberman. But as you can see, Atlus did put out this with the original style artwork on it. I don't know if it has the same artwork as the Japanese release, but they did keep pretty much the anime tone to the art style on their releases, which definitely appreciated. So very happy that that game came out, even though it's not really one of my favorites in the Bomberman series. They also released this one. So this is Bomberman World, and this is a little bit more of a traditional Bomberman style game. However, this one is where they started to move to more of a 3D direction, and it was kind of a quasi 2D 3D release in that the stages were presented in more of like an isometric style design. Overall, it's not really one of my favorite Bomberman games. It's certainly playable, and this one had some nice cutscenes and things like that built into it. This game does support the multi-tap, so you can use up to 5 players using the multi-tap with 4 controllers hooked up to one port, and then a single controller hooked up to a second port. So not as many as like Saturn Bomberman supports with the 10-player option, but definitely they were trying to keep some of the multiplayer aspects intact. Overall, this one I don't think sold all that well. You don't see this one too often. However, it doesn't seem to be one of the more expensive Atlus titles as of yet. So nice to have that again if you're a Bomberman fan, but probably not the most essential release. The next one I'm going to show you is actually one that got a recent revival. This is Brigadine, I believe is how you say that. And the subtitle in this one is The Legend of Forcena, or Forcena. I have not played this one a whole lot. This one is more of a simulation style RPG or tactical RPG. And I know this series has a lot of fans out there. I just haven't really had the time to put into this release. But as you can see, it does have their nice art style on it. You can also see a few things that characterize some of the Atlus releases where they would try to put the genre of game in a little logo here. So here you see it listed as RPG and Sim. Just to kind of designate that, you know, this is a tactical RPG, not a traditional RPG. And you'll see that logo vary a few on these releases that I'm going to show today. But why I say this one is relevant today is that this one got a recent reissue or revitalization on the Switch. So it's kind of an unusual title to see come back, as it was pretty obscure in its first run, but it seems that the Switch version has quite a few fans as well, and it's nice that they're keeping the series alive. This one was developed in Japan, I believe, by a different developer. It's credited to a company called Hardy Robin. Don't really know what the story is there. Might have been the character designers, though, too. It could be a proper Atlus title. I'm just not quite familiar with it enough to say either way. But nice artwork on this one, and as you'll see in many of the games that I'm going to show, a lot of them came in these double-sized cases. Not necessarily always because they were a multi-disc game. This one is just a single-disc game, but it actually had a nice thick manual that it came with. And so you can kind of see that that just takes up some real estate. And then what makes this one a little bit more difficult to find complete is this one did actually come with a map. So kind of aping some of the working designs characteristics on some of these releases, and that they tried to include some bonus items to make the games a little bit more palatable to some of the collector aspects. You'll also see that they use the full-color disc art on a lot of the releases, maybe even all of the ones I'm going to show you. And that was something I commented on in my Namco video, that Namco obviously spent a few more bucks on their releases to use that multicolored disc art and really make the games stand out a little bit better. So just a couple traits of the Atlus releases that resonated with me over time. And, you know, again, I kind of look at it as like a Working Designs Junior. They may not have gone as full out as Working Designs did, but they definitely tried to add some value for game collectors and those that really just wanted more appealing packaging art. So this next one we're going to look at is probably one of the most unusual of these releases. This is Eggs of Steel, Charlie's Excellent Adventure. Get that pun in there? Really nice stuff. Why I said this one's pretty unique is this one actually has a variant that I don't own yet. And this one was released originally or initially as a Blockbuster exclusive. So you'll see a variant of this out there that has like a little Blockbuster logo here, and it'll say Blockbuster exclusive. The whole thing with that, though, is it's a lie. This game actually got a full retail release as well, obviously in limited quantities. I don't know really which came first. I'm assuming the Blockbuster did, and then they ultimately went ahead and did a retail release as well. Why I find it hard to get the Blockbuster one is usually the manuals have been gutted and thrown away, like the inside of it, or it's detached from the booklet, and then the disc art usually has like a big Blockbuster sticker on it that's not really appealing. But this one's intact, and again, it has that nice full-color artwork on it. As far as the game itself, it's very unusual. This was actually developed by a subsidiary of Enix in Japan, and it's an action, kind of, you know, intended to be probably for a younger audience type game. It has pre-rendered backgrounds, so kind of if you like that style of PS1 game, this one's probably for you. They also put a lot of energy into the cutscenes in this, so very, very detailed cutscenes, even though the game itself is kind of a minor work. So really interesting. I think the subsidiary that put this out was maybe more of like an experiment. It wasn't really Enix's core team, but definitely a unique title for the PS1. Ultimately, I'd like to chase down that variant too, but I wasn't going to let that hold up the video. I figured I'd still show you what I had today. So the next one of these is one that I bought on release, and this is actually a unique entry in the series for a couple reasons. So number one, this is the only fighting game that Atlus brought to the US on the PS1, and you can see again they put kind of their own little stamp there for branding on what type of game it was, so it tells you right there it's a fighting game. Probably intended ultimately to release a few more of these, but they didn't. The other reason I say this game is unique is this is the entry to the Guilty Gear series, which has gone on till today with about 5,000 sequels, it feels like. And ultimately, this is the one that introduced the characters to the world. Atlus didn't develop this themselves. It was a game by Arc System Works, who I believe still makes the games today. But what really stood out for this one is if you looked at this as compared to the Capcom 2D fighters that kind of ruled the world at this time, the artwork on this was just so much more beautiful. Very high-res 2D character art designs, a lot of color, just the animation quality in this was really top-notch. And I have a feeling that Capcom was put on notice when this game initially came out, especially in Japan, because they probably had to up their game a little bit as far as their graphics. The gameplay itself is okay. It's not one of my favorite fighters, but ultimately, you know, it doesn't hold up as well as the graphics and the impact that those made. But one of the things that just really got the Guilty Gear series off on its good start was the introduction of these two main characters, which I believe are Saul and Kai, if I remember right. I might be slightly off on that. Been a long time since I played this. But ultimately, Guilty Gear is a very popular series as of today, and it was pretty cool that Atlus took a chance on this and published this in the US, especially because the company really wasn't known for fighting games, with the exception of their Power Instinct series that they'd put out a few releases on themselves. Next, we're going to take a look at possibly the last release by Atlus on the PS1. This was a pretty late release for the system. This is Hoshigami Ruining Blue Earth, and this one is, again, more of like a tactical or sim type RPG. I put a little bit of time into this one. It didn't really capture my attention, and beautiful artwork on it, I will say. It does have just that nice, double case with the single disc in there just because of the large manual. But ultimately, this one I didn't really play all that much. The other thing about this one is it did get a DS release, so there's like a DS reimagination of this title as well. If you're interested in checking it out further, might be a little bit more accessible to find. I haven't looked up the price on this one lately, but for a long time this one really wasn't going for all that much, considering it was probably a pretty limited late release title for the system. And when I say late release, I don't mean like the very end of PlayStation, but probably as far as like A and AA titles, this was toward the end, which was like late 2001, I believe this game came out, or possibly even 2002. So pretty neat that this one exists. The other little footnote on that one is the ill-fated Game Go magazine actually had that as the cover game on issue 2, which never went to press, but you can download online. So they intended to do a full cover article on that game, and maybe that little bit of push would have given it a little bit more sales than what it got, but you never know. Next, we'll move on to another tactical or sim RPG, and that is Kartia, the World of Fate. This one also doesn't really get talked about all that much. It does have those Yoshitaka Amano art designs to it, so you can kind of see that with the cover art there. Kind of reflects some of the earlier Final Fantasy titles as far as that art style, very familiar from the Japanese artist. But as far as the game itself, it really must not be that memorable, and honestly, I haven't put much time into it either. But this one, again, kind of falls through the cracks. You don't see it very often, yet it doesn't seem to be one of the more expensive Atlus titles for the system. So maybe if you've played this one, you can weigh in whether it's worth investing a little more time or not, other than the art style, which is pretty cool. You do see that foil, too, where, again, it's kind of like the Working Designs games. Some of the games have that foil print on the cover as well. It makes them stand out on the shelf, so kind of nice and visually appealing. All right, we'll move on to the next group of games, and we're going to talk about a pretty popular release, I would say, and that is Ogre Battle. This is also subtitled March of the Black Queen, and it is the limited edition, even though it's really the only edition on the PS1. This is an enhanced version of the Super Nintendo game that Atlus did not publish. It was actually published by the developer Enix, and then they took it over for the PS1 release. So obviously they were fans of the game and put this out. Like I said, this one does hold its value pretty well, and it seems like it sold decently well compared to some of the other games we're talking about today. So it seems like many people actually did play this one. Atlus also did a nice job by including the controllers that it supports, and the optional controller it's referring to there is the ASCII grip controller, which lets you play one-handed and really works well with some of the RPG-style games. But really nice artwork on this one. Ogre Battle has a very convoluted history and release schedule. There's lots of other re-releases that came after this one in the series as well. So you can certainly catch Ogre Battle on multiple platforms, but I do think the PS1 version that Atlus put out is a nice classy package, so definitely worth having for that aspect. We're going to talk about another anomaly of the Atlus PS1 set, and that is peak performance. This one is unusual for a few different reasons. Number one, it's a racing game, and Atlus, as far as I know, didn't put out any other racing games for the system, unless you count Bomberman Fantasy Race. But what really is unique about this one is it was an earlier racing release game for the system, and while it looks like it would be like a truck racing game or something like that from the cover, it's really far from the reality of what it was in Japan. So this was actually a drift racing game, and it was developed by the company Cave, which is so well known for producing shooters over the years. But they did release a few other games in other genres, and they did release this as a drift racing game in Japan. I guess that drift racing wasn't really a thing in the mid-90s in the US, or at least the awareness of it to the point that it is today. So they felt a need to rebrand it, and they licensed the Pikes Peak Hill Climb Association, put their stamp on this, and that's why you see some of the cover art changes there with a affiliated Pikes Peak climb car. So obviously that's a portion of the game, but there is a lot of traditional, more drift-style racing. This game really tried to do a lot, and ultimately the graphics and things like that were just kind of simplistic because it was a more early racing release for the system. So not really the greatest game, but you don't see this very often, and I just think it got lost in the shuffle of all the racing games of that era. However, it was kind of unique in that it was based on a Japanese drift title, of which there were many in Japan that just never made it over here. Next, we're going to move into a big title in Atlus's history, and at the time, we probably didn't really think it was going to be in the US, but that is the Persona series. So this is the original Persona release in the US. This was the first game that we saw here, and obviously this is probably Atlus's #1 moneymaker today. Persona has branched out into a million different sub-franchises, and the relation to all the Shin Megami Tensei games and all those other side quests and side games that they have now that have really made it a very powerful franchise in Atlus's history. However, this was just really seen as yet another RPG at the time, although a very different style with kind of the student setting and things like that with the various personas of the game. If you've never played the game, it definitely stands out today, but at the time, I don't really think people knew what to make of it. It wasn't highly reviewed or anything like that in the magazines at the time, and it was one of the earlier RPGs for the system. Eventually, this game did catch on with popularity, obviously due to many of the sequels that came along later, and I think Atlus actually repressed this on the PS1, because there was a time where it seemed like this game was much easier to find than it was initially, so whether this is a true original pressing or one of the reissues, honestly, I don't know. I bought it used, and I don't think there's a way to tell. But overall, definitely a very collectible game for the PS1. A lot of people are chasing this down because obviously they're interested in the roots of the series, and definitely a fun game to play, if you really have the time to invest in it. So, can recommend that one. Probably the game that is even more well-known today is its sequel, and that is Persona 2 Eternal Punishment. This one has pretty cool artwork on it. This one came out a few years later after the first one there. And this one has definitely picked up with the collector interest as well, although you can get it on multiple different platforms also. This one came out on the PSP, and I think I'm sure you can download it on multiple different ways today, but there's probably some other physical releases that have come out or rebrandings of the series that are included in some other newer releases. But definitely, if you're into the Persona series, I can see why this is a very popular title. I believe there was a second version of Persona 2 in Japan, and we just got the Eternal Punishment. But I think there was like a second variant of this with some different storylines, and that one never made it here. Atlus, I guess, didn't sell enough of this one to release that one as well. So now you can pretty much release anything Persona here and it's going to sell, but it definitely wasn't the case in the PS1 era. This series truly caught fire at a much later date. So nice to have the combo of those. Next, we're going to take a look at another unique RPG. I think by the time that this game came out, Atlus really saw the landscape of PS1 just really being an RPG powerhouse system, and realizing that if they wanted to get some buyers in the US, they had to go a little bit deeper into some of the niches that would really attract a different audience. So what I noticed about this one, especially when it came out, is it almost felt like they were marketing this game to more of a female audience, and hoping that that would really resonate with the title of, kind of this princess tale, I believe it's based on, and then also the thing that makes this game unique is it is based on its subtitle, Rhapsody, a musical adventure. It has a heavy music component, and there's songs and things like that the characters sing along the way to advance the storyline. So, very colorful game, has a nice presence to it. I've never beat this game. And then just really to emphasize the musical aspect, they did include a soundtrack CD, which wasn't really common during the era, although you see that much more commonly today. So, again, just kind of neat that they were releasing that and emphasizing, the audio component of the game by giving that free soundtrack CD with the package. All right, I think we're going to talk about the first title by Atlus next. This was a long box release. So this is the only long box game that Atlus released in the US. It was an early title, obviously. and that is Space Griffin VF9. So this one's kind of unique in that it's a mech battle game, 3D action game. Very crude graphics, I guess, by today's standards, but it was developed by a company called Panther Software, and they did put out some other releases that were well regarded. Definitely released a lot of mech-type games, but this one also had some action RPG elements as well, so if you can truly get into it, obviously there's a lot of gameplay to be had here. This one didn't really resonate with me all that much, but probably if I'd been into this when it first released, I might have respected it a little bit more. Kind of uncommon to find this one in good condition because it is one of the Ridge Box releases, as I call them, and they have the pasted-on artwork and things like that, and they tend to peel off and just get beat up. So if you find this game in good shape, I would definitely recommend grabbing it, because most of the copies I see out there, either the plastic case has been broken or the artwork's peeling off of it. So just something to look out for from a collecting standpoint. Next is the last game that I got for the set. So if you watched my most recent pickups video, you saw this game. This is Tactics Ogre, and this is obviously a game of the Ogre Battle series. Very difficult game for me to find, and I don't really know why. I obviously could have bought it online multiple times, but as far as trying to get this game in the wild, I failed years in, years out. So I can honestly say through all my years of game hunting, I never had an opportunity to buy this game for $5 or anything like that. I had to truly pay a market price to get this game, but definitely interested in trying this. I haven't had a chance to pop it in yet. I like the original Ogre Battle okay, although it's a little bit slow-paced, and this one having more of a tactical aspect to it. I'm not sure if I'll get into it as much as well, but definitely interested in checking it out. So that's on the future to-do list. Next up is an Atlus game that I did buy new on release, and this one is one that I absolutely love. Very difficult game to find today and very expensive, unfortunately, but this is one that I truly treasure, and I'm so happy that they picked this release up. This is Tail Concerto, and believe it or not, it was developed by Bandai in Japan, a game that probably was getting passed on by Bandai's US offices. I didn't see any news that they were planning on publishing it here. So Atlus came to the rescue and decided to release this game here. It's a 3D adventure game, and it has just some really great character art in it, and just interesting art design with this police dog and these evil cats that you have to capture in bubbles with your little mech. So very beautiful art design, as I said. Music is good in this game as well. Has that, orchestral music sound to it, really playing on the concerto piece. And just really happy they released this game here. Just offered a lot of good color and action for a 3D game, which, typically I gravitated toward 2D action games during this era. So for something 3D to grab my attention, this was definitely a cut above. Actually, the reason I bought this game on release is Atlus released a demo disc for this, and ultimately I got a free copy of the demo disc and was instantly won over and said, I've got to get this. So it didn't really get the best reviews in magazines and things like that, but I really treasure it personally, just based on how I gravitated to that demo disc and then decided to go ahead and buy the actual release once it came out. So very happy to have that in the collection for sure. We got 2 more games to cover, and then that's really going to do it for the Atlus set. This next one's one that I also like, and also got based on a demo disc. So this is Thousand Arms, and this is yet another RPG, of course, but what makes this one a little bit unique, especially for its era, is it has some dating sim elements. And that's something that we do see pretty often today. It's not that uncommon to see a Japanese game with dating sim elements brought to the US, but at the time, this was pretty unique. I can't really think of too much else that decided to go down that path. So maybe someday this game will get, really regarded as a trailblazer for that, especially if you're into that kind of thing. For me, it just was a curiosity. It's not necessarily a genre I chase, but I remember getting that demo disc and saying, this is actually very different than a lot of the other RPGs out there, in that you have to, woo the different girls and you go on dates as part of the adventuring in the game. So really like the artwork on this game. It did have some nice extras in here. You can kind of see a little blurb here about it. So you got a lenticular 3D card in here. I don't know if I can show it to you. There it is, with the main character Mice. It's kind of the lenticular action. And then it also came with memory card stickers, which some of the other Atlus titles had as well. These haven't been peeled, thankfully. And then the other gimmick on this one is you could send off and get a CD that had like desktop images and things like that for your computer and wallpaper and stuff like that. I don't have the send away disc. Maybe somebody else can hook me up with one of those down the road, or I can find one on eBay, but it would be nice to have for sure. But definitely a cool game. It definitely probably isn't like a top, 3 PS1 RPG, but I really like that it does something different, and at the time it caught my attention based on that. So, can recommend checking that out as well. Alright, well the last title in the Atlus published releases for the PS1, and I just did these alphabetically, is Trap Gunner Countdown to Oblivion. So this is again one of the few action titles that they released. This one kind of does a little bit too much. So it does have like a trap setting element, kind of like the Deception games, but it's more of like a overhead gameplay design, and then just ultimately a lot of action and explosions and things like that go on during the stages. So it's a little bit hard to keep track of all your objectives and really what you're supposed to do with the stages, but it does have a nice art style to it, and really stands out, as far as the overall package. Again, this one doesn't really seem to be one of the most expensive ones of the series, but I very rarely see this game, especially in stores. So if you do get a chance to find this one, it's probably worth picking up as a curiosity. It definitely has a nice art style to it, like I said, so worth checking out overall. But that's about it. Like I said, I don't remember taking a count here, but, probably 15 or so titles that Atlus released in the United States. Obviously not one of the biggest publishers for the PS1, but definitely one of the highly regarded ones, especially in retrospect. Looking at the art style that they put into some of their releases, some of the extra care and attention in the packaging, and then ultimately just their selection, which was pretty broad as far as some of the releases that they brought us. So that about does it for this video. I hope to make more in this series as I complete some of the other publisher subsets. But please take a moment, like, comment, subscribe, let me know what you think, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great day or night, wherever you are.